Welcome to the Nonprofit Tech Podcast presented by fusionSpan. My name is Justin Burniske, and I am here today with a very special guest, Rebecca Achurch, who's the founder and CEO of Achurch Consulting. Welcome, Rebecca.
Why, thank you, Justin. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on today to talk about work from home. I think it's obviously a hot topic right now with so many people working from home. Can you start by talking a little bit about this? Because this for you didn't just start in this year in 2020. When did you actually begin your work from home experience?
You're exactly right, Justin. I've actually been working from home for approximately 15 years, almost 16 years now, I guess it is. When my husband was transferred, we were transferred out of the Washington, D.C. area down to Charlotte, North Carolina. And at the time, I was working for a large professional association and doing project management for them. In fact, implementing an AMS at the time. And walked into the office and basically said, my husband's being transferred. We've got a couple options. It may be time for us to part ways. I can stay on as a contractor, or we can try this as an employer-employee relationship still. And so they said, why not keep you as an employee? And so 15 years ago, we, packed up the truck, moved to Charlotte, and I started working remotely and have been working remotely ever since.
Wow. And so how long, but then you left and you transitioned into consulting. When did that transition happen? And was there ever any consideration of getting an office at that point?
Absolutely not. I found that in the time that I worked from home for the association, that I was much more productive, happier. I had a much greater work-life balance. And so I saw how effective we could build teams from a virtual environment. And I also wanted to make sure that I was hiring the best talent. And I didn't want to be constrained by a physical location or a physical building. So when it was time for, when we established our consulting firm, I wanted to be able to hire the best and brightest talent and not have constraints with the zip codes. So to me, it was never even a consideration to have a brick and mortar building. The technology was there. We knew the protocols that we needed to set up. We knew how to build a team. We knew how to build community. And our clients are all over the country. So why do we need to be in one physical location when we meet our clients where they are?
That makes a lot of sense. So now that you have seen a bunch of your clients who are moving remote, they're adjusting to this process, what are some of the common mistakes that you're seeing people make with their transition into working from home?
Well, I'm happy to say that I think a lot of people have done this a lot more gracefully than I thought they were going to. Technology has gotten to a point where many people were already working, from a technology standpoint in the cloud. And so it made the transition much easier from a continuity standpoint, just typical business continuity. And so I think where I've seen people struggle is how to use the collaboration tools and how to use the informal and how to establish informal and formal communication channels. So, conducting all of your communication via email, probably not a good idea right now. And so if they hadn't been introduced to Teams or Slack or some other sort of informal communication channel, that I've seen people really struggle with getting on board with those tools, understanding how they should be used and optimized, and thinking that all communication should still take place via email. So if you go that route, you kind of struggle. And then, adopting the new tools, there was a learning curve there as well. So I think, what I would characterize it is it's not a mistake that people have made, but they've been more caught off guard. But they didn't have those protocols in place because those norms already exist in the workplace. So when you're in a physical office, if somebody's door is shut, to knock. If you can pop down the hall for the quick casual conversation, what a meeting looks like. So when going virtual, again, I don't think it was mistakes as much as comfort with using the tools and the technology to say, when do I chat with someone informally? When is it time to send an email? When do I need to get on a video conference with someone? can I just, video conference someone at any point in time with Teams? What does that look like? So I think it was what I've seen people really struggle with and try to get their arms around is, what does that look like now? Because it's a new way of communicating that perhaps wasn't as comfortable or familiar as what happens in a standard brick and mortar. But that said, there's some other challenges in just working at home in general. So what I see from a personal side in terms of an individual and setting up to be successful in working at home, when you haven't set boundaries potentially with your family. And I think right now, especially with COVID, it's very difficult because we've got all of our kids running around, our dogs running around. I mean, who hasn't been on a meeting with at least, one interruption of some sort going on? And you know what? I think that's fine. Because I think what's happened here is we've understood that we're all human, which I think has actually been a great outcome of this, is the humanity of who we are as individuals has really come to the forefront of this. But there are times where you do need to try to set those boundaries, and establishing those and having those conversations and being comfortable with the conversations. Again, I think that's more unfamiliar territory. Other newbie mistakes, I'm going to work in my pajamas all day. Probably not a good idea. And it's not a good idea from a couple of standpoints of having that routine and structure. Yeah, you can be a little fluid. Admittedly, I'm sleeping a little later, I typically don't get up to around 6:30, where I know tons of my colleagues, when they commuted, they were up at 5 and 5:30 because they were going into DC. So I've always had the luxury of sleeping until around 6:30, but my routine is I get up, I take a shower, or I get up, I go to the gym, whatever it is, kind of having that ritual that starts the day. That idea of, I'm just going to loll around, but you've got to have that ritual to set your schedule. The other thing I think people make a mistake on is they don't move. For example, I'll admit I've committed the sin today. I've had too many back-to-back meetings, and I've in essence sat in this chair all day. Well, really, that's not healthy. Your hip flexors get tight. You need to make sure that you're focusing in different areas instead of at the screen all the time. So I find that people, when they get entrenched in the work, they're not actually getting up and moving. So, I think what we're struggling with in terms of the common, as you just came to the common mistakes, is it's really just familiarity, both on the organization side and then setting up that environment for you as an individual. So I really break it out into two categories: is how do I set myself up for personal success? And then how do we set up those protocols again for organizational success, so that we can work in a productive environment?
I think that's such a good observation of kind of having that routine, particularly, one of the things I feel like that everyone was forced to start working from home. I set up my desk, I partially out of necessity, but it's a standing desk for me. It's on top of my bureau. It's in my bedroom because I kind of have to have my kids, I've got a 3 and a 7-year-old running around,
Awesome.
4 and a 7-year-old running around. And so kind of needed that space, but it also, that was very helpful because I realized part of my commute, I get to walk, I get to move, and you're losing so much of that. And so finding new ways to add into that routine. And I think that's also, you pointed out with, when you're in an office, there are these sort of unspoken behaviors that we learn, as people. I think we're seeing more companies planning for remote work for a longer period of time. I think some of the big tech firms have already said all the way through 2020 they're going to allow remote work.
Mm-hmm.
As people are and companies are starting to take that into account and adjust to a long-term remote,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the biggest challenges you think they'll have, and how can they plan for those?
You're exactly right about the tech companies. Twitter, Facebook, Zillow, they've all announced that their workforce can work from home, or I think Twitter even said wherever you want in the world from now until the end of the year, that they've gotten accustomed to this. And I think I already shared that one of the associations that I work with has already announced that they're going to be working from home until September. So I think that some of the keys to success and moving forward are are beginning to put some of those protocols and rituals in place. I personally believe that what COVID has done is advance work from home at least 10 years. I really feel like, and I'm going to wax poetic here a little bit, but we had that moment where Yahoo and a couple large companies brought people back into the office because they didn't see the collaboration that they wanted to. Well, I would argue that they didn't see the collaboration because they hadn't adjusted their protocols. They hadn't trained their managers. They hadn't helped the organization make that new muscle memory for working remote in place prior to going remote. If we're going to go remote, we need to do so deliberately, thoughtfully. I know we've kind of hit here, but I think the long-term success is now for us to take that step back and say, what is it that we need to put in place now for long-term success? So Justin, you hit on it. In the office place, we have those silent indicators. Again, a door being shut. What does a meeting look like? People sitting in a room talking. If someone's walking around the hallway, you can interrupt them. So we have those norms already in place. So what's different in long-term success in virtual work is being deliberate about those, having conscious conversations so that you have aligned expectations versus misaligned expectations. One of the examples I'll bring up is chat and informal communication. So within your organization, if you're IMing, is there an expectation that you're going to get back with them immediately, within an hour, by the end of the day? So Justin, if you IM me and I'm not on Do Not Disturb and I'm green, and you think, why didn't Rebecca respond to me? Hold on, she's green. She hasn't responded to me. So you could have a totally different takeaway where I could have maybe I was doing some deep work and didn't want to be interrupted because I was writing something that was very sophisticated. Well, my signal to you, my silent signal said green. So you're potentially interpreting I should be available. And in your mindset, you should think she should be responding immediately. Why isn't she responding? Is she not working? So we need to thoughtfully think about that. So that's a communication breakdown that could cause tension in the organization that it doesn't need to. So I think about that scenario when really, if I'm doing deep work, what I should potentially do is set myself on Do Not Disturb so that we don't have misaligned expectations about communication. And that we should also have a conversation within either a department or division within work groups about what expectations are around this channel of communication. Do we expect immediate responses? How do we read the new silent signals of yellow, green, those automatic indicators that are incorporated in so many tools? So what's happening is people are making assumptions about behavior without actually checking those. Just the way, but we're making, again, in that office, if somebody's door shut, you're going to knock and, they may not have time for you, but, we've got to figure out what that knock looks like in the virtual environment. So I think that's really one of the keys of success for long-term, kind of remote work moving forward. The other thing I think is really managing things differently. So remote work environments work best, in my opinion, in transparent organizations because there's a level of accountability and transparency of managing to the outcome versus managing to the hours worked. So you can have some asynchronous communication. So transparency and protocols for transparency are also really important for being able to see the status and state of a project or initiative, to be able to do handoffs in an asynchronous way versus some other sort of channel like a project management tool, a task list that's shared among the team. So you can see that. So I think there are just some, as I said, it's kind of very deliberate and mindfulness about some protocols that you need to put in place and then managing that to that. Also putting in some additional communication cadences between managements and the team. You have those naturally within a workplace where you, again, run into somebody in the hall. But I often say to managers when working with them, the only time you ever call one of your staff members on the phone is when they're in trouble or when you want something. That's probably not a good way for you to build a relationship in a virtual environment. So you have to think deliberately about how you're building that relationship just the way you would when you're in the workplace. How are you recreating that water cooler moment? How are you creating those casual conversations that allow you to build strong connections long term? So that is another key to success of figuring out how you're going to do that. And we've got quite a few tips on how to do that.
Well, yeah, I think that's the green indicator. I think we use at fusionSpan, we use Slack. I don't do a good job, definitely, of updating my status, but I also, people will ping me whenever. And overall, we've been using it for several years. And so there's a general cadence of, I will get back to them as quickly as possible. And I have never had anyone feel like I'm ignoring them. But I do think if you're new to it and we send that email and we start to worry, oh, we haven't gotten a response, what's wrong? And so just vocalizing some of those expectations and getting them out there and not always making those assumptions is really great. I think, you touched a little bit on managers and being, connecting with your team members in that informal, water cooler setting. Can we dive in a little bit there? Because I think, I have my check-ins with my team. I've
Right.
tried to have some, we try and make sure we're taking a little bit of time at the start of meetings to just check in with each other, see how we're doing. Are there other strategies that you're seeing managers take that really help keep their team engaged, keep them motivated, keep them moving forward?
Absolutely. So, you just hit on part of it is, every efficiency book that you read talks about having a set agenda for all your meetings so you can stay focused and get things done. I agree with an agenda, but I also believe in connectedness. And so I find in a virtual environment, from a manager standpoint, one thing you can do is show up to a virtual meeting, when you're doing a Teams meeting or Zoom or whatever platform you're using. If you're on video, show up a couple minutes earlier. Allow for that space for people who are going to join to maybe have that casual conversation. So I find managers are doing some, they'll show up a little bit earlier. They allow for that space to have those casual conversations. You don't just necessarily dive straight into the agenda, but allow for the conversation to flow a little and then get onto the agenda. I think the other thing they do is they practice transparency themselves and model that behavior. So one of the things we say for managers and teams in the environment from the managers, the calendar is king. So being able to know that everybody's sharing their calendar, maybe not full details, but limited details, so you can see when somebody's available. Again, that's one of those protocols. And so knowing that you as a manager, you say, hey, if you need to schedule a call, I'm available from this time to this time every day. Just drop it on my calendar. Happy to meet with you. So really creating that opening for two-way communication and making sure that staff member can essentially do the pop-in as they would in your office, to create that virtual pop-in. They can pop it on your calendar and you're going to respond and you're going to be there. So I think that's a technique that our successful managers use. They also allow for flexibility. So one of the greatest benefits of working virtually, in my opinion, is you can work to your energy level. So we have some people on our team that really work best in the morning, and they work mostly, they're online at 7 o'clock in the morning until about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then they're toast. They don't, after 4 o'clock, really not the best time. But that 7 a.m., schedule is really good for them. So allowing for flexibility, because how your team works, that is something a manager can do to really get productivity and, frankly, happiness, satisfaction out of your team. That, people always talk about engaged employees in the workplace. Well, that creates an engaged employee when you allow them to work when they're at their best and can give you their best instead of shoehorning them in to a specific schedule. Well, virtual work definitely allows you to do that. So I think that's what good managers do. I'm trying to think, the other thing they do is really celebrate successes. And, this is another way we can use some of those channels, not necessarily email, but again, Slack or, Teams or a channel within, some sort of communication team to really shout out and celebrate what the team is doing and what individual contributions are to that team. That's important, that you need to have some way to really be able to celebrate individual contributions to the team and team contributions in a way that they are recognized in a more public forum. So those are a couple of the things that we're seeing. Increasing that cadence of communication, making sure that, even if it's just 10 minutes or a quick phone call, that they know you're there and accessible, and that you're modeling that transparent, accessible sort of behavior that you want to get out of the team.
I love especially the idea of when you are at your best, being able to work then. So many of us, I feel like we've been forced into this pattern, and we're not all the same people. We don't all work on the same schedule. And I am, for whatever reason, I am definitely a night person. And I mean, part of it, I think, is I know I'm not getting that many emails, but there's sort of this, after my kids go to sleep, I can sit down, I can get some deep focus in, get some work done. And in a manner that I just, during the day, I just don't have that space necessarily. And so I think both as a manager, it's almost, I feel like we should be encouraging it, allowing people to reflect on themselves and understand themselves a little bit better, and so to have that, it's almost like a growth opportunity here. So are there other things that you're hoping people will take from this and be able to either even, once things kind of get back to whatever the new normal will be, that they will still kind of retain and take away from this experience of work, having everyone kind of forced into a work from home, that you hope will really be positive for people?
I do. What I was thinking of, again, back to the silver lining, which we talked about earlier. I think one of the biggest silver linings that I'm seeing right now is that I think the humanity of the workforce is coming out. I think we've been I'm not coming up with the right words, but in the focus, it's so, in the office, sometimes it's so much about being visible. And, I think our introverts really shine right now in this environment. We've got great opportunities for
I mean, you touched on it a little bit earlier. You talked about Yahoo. They
yep.
tried work from home, but they didn't really try it. They didn't really prep for it. So how is this going to be? What are you hoping people will take?
So I think the positives that are going to come out of this is that we have remembered that our employees are humans. And I feel like when we only see the persona of the work persona that we present in the office, in a physical office, that I'm watching those walls come down. And again, that remembering that we are multifaceted individuals. We have home lives, we have personal lives, we have friends, we have family. And I think that is what's really coming out of this. I was on a staff meeting with one of our clients, and it was awesome, where they did a whole slideshow of everybody's dogs and their home workplaces. And it was really inspiring to watch that. And I do think that is going to come out of this. I also think that prioritization is going to come out of this. I think when we go back into the office, there's going to be a fundamental question of, when the office is open back, of what's the work we really need to do? Where are we getting the most value? I think people are going to start asking that question, because I think it's changing our mindset a little bit in what are important activities versus what aren't important activities. I think there's a lot of make work that happens in a physical office that we do because it's familiar. So I feel like that we've kind of jumped into a very unfamiliar territory for a lot of people. I'm hoping that another outcome of this is people's comfort with change a little more than perhaps they were familiar before or comfortable with. I do think that every workplace, we need our maintainers. We need people that help us, remind us of our history and make sure that we don't go off the rails in any one major way or the other. But I also think, I'm watching organizations that said, we will never go remote. We will never do this. This is too hard. We'll never learn. That they've leaned in to some of the tech that they thought was so scary, and they've gotten really comfortable with it really fast. So I think that, I want that element of things don't always have to be perfect to come out of this, that we can try new things as well. So, I think if we can say at the end of this, what can we really hold on to? I'd love it to be the humanity. I'd love it to be, doing what we really need to do versus not what we have always done, and feeling comfortable and leaning into some things, some new opportunities that maybe we weren't as comfortable doing in the past because we had never been thrown in a position that was totally different.
Yeah, I love it. I love the idea that we're going to be learning and growing. Is I hope I hope you're right. I believe you're right. I
Well,
believe you're
I
right.
hope so too. That's my hope. I know that having worked remotely as long as I have, I mean, people laugh because they've seen my kid grow up in my house. They've seen, my cats grow up. They've seen, me age, frankly. And I do feel like I think we can be accessible, and I think we can be very human. I think a lot of people were scared of the tech. Well, how are we going to have video conferences, and isn't that going to be difficult? And I think it was much more difficult 15 years ago when we didn't have video. I mean, when I started working remotely, Justin, there wasn't any video. It was all audio conference. So I used to joke that one of the takeaways for me is that I really know a person's tone of voice now. This is kind of a sidebar, but it's very true that I can now get on the phone and I'll say, "You're having a bad day, aren't you?" And they're like, "Well, how do you know I'm having a bad day?" Well, I don't have the benefit of the body language. And so I had to be so attuned to somebody's tone of voice and how it changed. And when they were angry or frustrated or tired, that your voice, your body language is number one, your voice is number two, and then the written language is number three in terms of how you communicate. So I'm always amazed that everybody always like, let's write that down. Let's send an email. Let's do this. I'm thinking, wait a minute, why are we doing that? Either get on the phone or get on a video conference. But as I said, 15 years ago, I didn't have the benefit of the video. Now that I can combine video and audio, sometimes I turn off video, frankly, so I can listen better because I want to make sure. So I'm hoping that what comes out of this also is that we listen better. We're paying attention, because when we really listen instead of being overly influenced by body language, then I think that's helpful too, because we really know what people are saying, and you can be attuned to what you really need versus making assumptions based on body language, which is what we do in our communication every single day.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, to some extent, I've seen with this move to remote, more people are turning on their cameras, and so I am getting to kind of see more, and people are definitely getting more comfortable with it. And it is it's very hard to multitask while you're on a video call with somebody and they're staring you in the face. It's very clear that if someone is not focused, whereas I feel like there are all these meetings where it tends to be a lot easier for people to kind of drift off into their devices. So,
Oh, Justin, I couldn't agree more. That is a number one rule. That is a rule that I have about working remotely, is really you're not to multitask. If you're on a video conference, just as if you were sitting in a room, you should be paying attention. I think so much, again, if you're having a meeting and everybody's sitting on their devices, what's the real value of that meeting? Probably not very valuable. So that's that stuff I feel like we should be questioning. Do we really just need to have a quick 10-minute, or is it, conversation that's a one-on-one, or, a quick 10-minute conversation with everybody followed up by, some information in a channel? Is that more efficient and effective than 10 people sitting in a room, all sitting on their devices going, "I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Could you repeat that again?" That's make work to me. But when I multitask on a video conference, I'm so busted because I can't listen and pay attention and multitask at the same time. So I think if we're going to have a video conference, if we're going to have a meeting, get value out of it, and please pay attention.
absolutely, absolutely. This has been very helpful and very insightful. And if someone has been listening and they're like, okay, now I feel like I've just scratched the surface. I need more. What resources are out there, and where can they connect with you?
I'd love to help any organization, or I'd say we'd love to help any organization who's struggling with this. Part of what we do at Achurch Consulting is we help with not only the tech challenges, the collaboration tools that you should use, but really the how you should use them. And those protocols that we've talked about help guide you through those processes to make sure that the decisions that are being made are socialized throughout the organization, consistent with the culture, and make sense and can be used. We don't want to over-engineer things, but you do need some guardrails. Because what you don't want is the communication breaking down in these sorts of times. So I think for long-term success, I think, even when we go back into the office, maybe it's going to be half in, half out. We're happy and we'd love to help you, begin to frame that out so that your company can have really long-term success instead of interim. And just go to our website, achurchconsulting.com. Or send an email to info@achurchconsulting.com, and we'd be happy to help.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Rebecca. And yeah, well, I hope people definitely check out your site. I think you're constantly putting information out. You've been putting out information on remote work for so long, and I thought appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us today.
Well, it is definitely, you're welcome. I appreciate being invited, and I hope this has been valuable for the audience. That's what matters the most. This is a passion topic of ours. Having done this for 15 years, we know it can be successful, and we want to watch other people be successful and be able to navigate these waters. So thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.